Sometimes a man's final choice reveals more about his soul than a lifetime of victories ever could, and what Jake Morrison chose in those dying moments would haunt 3 generations. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and give this video a like, because today's story will test everything you believe about honor, sacrifice, and redemption in the Old West. Picture this: autumn of 1887, somewhere along the desolate stretch between Amarillo and the New Mexico territory. The land here doesn't forgive. It's all cracked earth, twisted mesquite, and memories of what used to be. Our story centers on Jake Morrison, a former Union cavalry officer turned drifter, carrying more scars inside than the Comanche war paint could ever leave on his weathered face. His left leg drags slightly from a Shiloh bullet that never properly healed, and his eyes hold that 1,000-yard stare that only comes from seeing too much death. He's riding a stolen horse, though he'd never admit it was stolen, toward what he hopes might be his last chance at something resembling peace. The Old West has a way of breaking men slowly, like water wearing down stone, and Jake Morrison has been worn down to his very core. But fate, as it often does in these stories with emotion and suspense, had other plans entirely. As his mare crests a low hill, Jake spots something that stops his heart cold: smoke rising from the chimney of what should have been an abandoned homestead. The Kellerman farm had been deserted for 2 winters, ever since Apache raiders swept through and left nothing but ghosts and bad memories. Yet there it stands, that weathered barn casting long shadows in the late afternoon sun, and someone, or something, has made it home. Cowboys of the Old West knew that abandoned places in hostile territory meant one of 2 things: desperados hiding from the law, or something far worse. Jake's hand instinctively moves to his Colt .45, the metal warm against his palm from the day's ride, and he makes a choice that will echo through the generations. Jake approaches the homestead with the caution of a man who's buried too many friends. The closer he gets, the more wrong everything feels, like watching storm clouds gather when the morning started clear. Through the dusty barn's gaps, he catches glimpses of movement, but not the kind you'd expect from rustlers or renegades. It's careful, almost domestic. Someone's trying to live here, not just hide. His horse nicknames softly, and Jake dismounts, leading her by the reins rather than risk the sound of hoofbeats on hard earth. The Old West taught men to read signs like scripture, and every sign here whispers of desperation wrapped in determination. As he rounds the corner of the main house, Jake sees her. A woman in torn clothes, maybe 30 years old, with auburn hair escaping from a makeshift bun and hands that shake as she hangs laundry on a rope strung between 2 fence posts. Her dress once might have been blue, but sun and hardship have faded it to the color of old denim, and there are patches sewn with the kind of precision that speaks of pride refusing to bow to circumstance. She hasn't noticed him yet, and Jake finds himself frozen, watching as she works with the kind of quiet dignity that makes grown men reconsider their assumptions about strength. This isn't what he expected to find, and in his experience, unexpected discoveries in the territory usually meant trouble of the deadliest kind. Then she turns, and their eyes meet across 20 yards of broken dreams and desert wind. Her face doesn't show fear, it shows recognition, though Jake's certain they've never met. There's something in her expression, a mixture of relief and resignation that sends ice through his veins despite the warm afternoon. She knows who he is, or thinks she does, and that knowledge sits between them like a loaded gun on a poker table. The silence stretches until it becomes a thing with weight and substance, and Jake realizes that whatever brought this woman to an abandoned farm in hostile territory, it's connected to him in ways he can't yet fathom. But what happened next would change everything they both thought they knew about second chances. "You're late," she says, and her voice carries the kind of calm that only comes after you've screamed yourself hoarse and found silence on the other side. Jake's hand stays near his gun, but something in her tone, not accusation, not anger, just acceptance, makes him hesitate. She sets down the wet shirt she's been wringing out and walks toward him with steps that favor her left foot slightly, and Jake notices the way she holds her right arm close to her body, like it's been recently injured. The closer she gets, the clearer it becomes that this woman has been through hell and somehow managed to climb back out, though the journey left its marks on every inch of visible skin. "Ma'am, I think you've got me confused with someone else," Jake says, but even as the words leave his mouth, He's studying her face for clues. There's something familiar in the set of her jaw, the way her eyes narrow when she concentrates. It's like looking at a painting you've seen before but can't quite place. The recognition sits just beyond reach, taunting him. She stops about 10 feet away, close enough that he can see the faded bruises along her collarbone and the way her hands bear fresh cuts from work that those hands were never meant to do. This is a woman who's learned to survive by sheer force of will, and Jake Morrison knows that kind of determination when he sees it. "My name is Sarah Kellerman," she says, and the world tilts sideways. The Kellermans died 2 years ago. Everyone knew that. Apache raid, no survivors, case closed. But here she stands, flesh and blood and impossibly alive, looking at him like he holds the key to every question that's been keeping her awake at night. Jake's mind races through possibilities, each one more disturbing than the last. If Sarah Kellerman survived, why didn't she seek help? Why hide in her own ruined homestead like a ghost haunting the scene of its death? And why, in God's name, does she look at him like she's been waiting for him specifically? The wind picks up, stirring dust devils around their feet and carrying the scent of rain that might never come. Sarah Kellerman watches Jake's face with the intensity of someone reading their own death warrant, and Jake realizes that whatever tragedy brought them to this moment, it's only the beginning of a story that's about to turn his world upside down. But what happened next would reveal secrets that some men kill to keep buried. Sarah reaches into her apron pocket with movements so careful they might as well be choreographed, and withdraws a piece of paper that's been folded and unfolded so many times the creases have worn soft as cloth. Jake's breath catches in his throat because he recognizes that paper, not the specific sheet, but the type. Military correspondence, the kind that arrives when someone wants to make arrangements that won't appear in any official records. His stomach drops like a stone into a deep well, and suddenly the pieces of this impossible puzzle start clicking into place with the sound of a coffin lid closing. "Captain Morrison," she says, reading from the letter with a voice steady as bedrock, "your services are required for a matter of utmost discretion involving the Kellerman situation. Payment as discussed. Come alone to the agreed location." Jake's world tilts because he never wrote that letter, never made any such arrangement, and sure as hell never agreed to any payment for services involving people he'd never heard of. But there it is, in handwriting that looks disturbingly similar to his own, signed with his name and bearing details that only he should know. Someone has been using his identity, his reputation, his very existence as a weapon against this woman and her family. Sarah folds the letter carefully, like she's putting away something precious rather than evidence of an elaborate deception. Her eyes never leave his face as she speaks again, and now Jake can hear the tremor underneath her controlled exterior. "They paid you $500 to make sure my family disappeared quietly, without questions from territorial authorities. What I need to know, Mr. Morrison, is whether you've come to finish the job, or whether seeing me alive has given you second thoughts." The words hit Jake like physical blows, each one driving home the horrible truth that someone has orchestrated this entire situation. The fake letter, the timing, even Sarah's presence here, with the precision of a master chess player moving pieces toward checkmate. But what Jake couldn't know was that the real puppet master was closer than either of them imagined, and the game they thought they were playing had rules that would cost them everything. Jake holsters his weapon completely, a gesture that makes Sarah's shoulders drop just slightly, the first sign of relief she's shown since they started talking. "Ma'am, I never wrote that letter, never took any money, and sure as hell never agreed to hurt your family. Someone's been using my name, and I intend to find out who." His words carry the ring of truth that comes from a lifetime of keeping promises he probably shouldn't have made, and Sarah studies his face with the intensity of someone whose life depends on reading men correctly. The late afternoon sun slants through the gaps in the barn boards, casting long shadows that dance like spirits between them, and Jake realizes they're both victims of something larger and more sinister than a simple case of mistaken identity. "Then how do you explain this?" Sarah asks, and leads him around to the back of the house where the porch steps are stained dark with something that definitely isn't mud. Jake kneels down, touching the stain with fingers that have seen enough battlefields to recognize dried blood when they find it. But it's not the blood that stops his heart, It's the military boot print pressed clear as day into the soft earth beside the steps. Size 11, cavalry issue, with the distinctive wear pattern on the left heel that comes from favoring an old injury. It's his boot print, impossible as that seems, and Jake knows with sick certainty that whoever's been impersonating him was here, in this very spot, not more than a few days ago. Sarah watches him process this information with the patience of someone who's already walked through every possible explanation and found them all wanting. "My husband Thomas recognized the limp when he saw you coming up the path," she says quietly. "He told me to run, to take little Mary and hide in the root cellar. But I couldn't leave him, not when he was hurt and bleeding and trying so hard to protect us." Her voice breaks just slightly on the last words, and Jake realizes that whatever happened here, Sarah Kellerman watched it all from whatever hiding place her husband's love had purchased with his life. The truth was about to surface, and with it, a betrayal that ran deeper than either of them could have imagined. Sarah leads Jake to a wooden door set into the ground near the house's foundation, the kind of root cellar that saved families during tornado season and hostile raids alike. As she lifts the heavy door, Jake catches the unmistakable scent of fear sweat and old blood, mixed with the earthier smells of preserved foods and damp soil. "Mary and I spent 3 days down there," Sarah says, her voice echoing slightly in the confined space. 3 days listening to footsteps overhead, waiting for someone to find us, not knowing if Thomas was alive or dead or worse. Jake peers into the darkness and sees blankets arranged with military precision, water containers, and food supplies that speak of preparation born from experience with violence. "They came twice," Sarah continues, and Jake notices her hands are shaking now, the first real crack in the armor she's built around her emotions. The first time, they searched the house, broke furniture, made noise like they were looking for something specific. But the second time, she pauses, swallowing hard, and Jake realizes she's about to tell him something that's been eating her alive for weeks. "The second time I heard voices, clear as day, coming from right above our heads. One of them had your voice, Mr. Morrison. Same tone, same way of speaking, even the same laugh when he found something that amused him." Jake's blood runs cold because he recognizes the implications of what she's telling him. Impersonation is one thing. Any actor with talent can mimic a voice well enough to fool strangers. But laughing the same way, speaking with identical patterns and inflections, that requires knowledge that goes beyond casual observation. It requires intimacy, the kind that only comes from spending considerable time studying someone's most unconscious behaviors. Someone has been watching Jake Morrison for months, maybe years, learning to become him so completely that even people who've never met him would recognize the performance as authentic. "Sarah," he says carefully, because the next question might shatter whatever fragile trust they've built between them, "what exactly did you hear them say?" But her answer would reveal a connection to his past that Jake Morrison thought he'd buried forever. Sarah closes her eyes tight, like she's forcing herself to remember something she's spent weeks trying to forget, and when she speaks, her voice drops to barely above a whisper. "The one with your voice, he was arguing with someone else about payment. Said the job was only half finished because they hadn't found the documents. The other man, his voice was rougher mean, he kept calling the first one Jake, and asking why he was making this so complicated." Jake feels the ground shift beneath his feet because there's only one person in the world who calls him Jake in that particular tone, with that mix of familiarity and resentment that comes from a lifetime of shared disappointments and mutual blame. "Then the rough-voiced one said something that made my blood freeze," Sarah continues, opening her eyes to watch Jake's face carefully. "He said, 'Tommy boy never should have written to your real brother about this railroad business. Now we've got to clean up the mess before little Jake comes looking for answers.' Mr. Morrison, the man using your name and voice, he kept insisting that the real Jake Morrison would never find out about any of this, because the real Jake Morrison doesn't give a damn about family loyalty." The words hit Jake like a physical blow because he knows exactly who she's describing, and the knowledge makes him sick to his stomach. Marcus Morrison, his twin brother, separated by birth by 11 minutes and by choice by 20 years of bad decisions and bitter disappointments. Marcus, who inherited the same face, the same voice, even the same laugh, but chose to use those gifts for cons and schemes instead of something resembling honor. Marcus, who Jake hasn't seen since their mother's funeral, when harsh words about duty and responsibility ended in a fistfight that scattered mourners and shattered what remained of their relationship. The Old West was full of men running from their pasts, but Jake never imagined his past would catch up to him wearing his own face and carrying his own reputation like a weapon against innocent people. But the worst revelation was still coming, and it would change everything Jake thought he knew about family, loyalty, and the price of old grudges. What railroad business? Jake asks, though part of him already dreads the answer. Sarah disappears into the house and returns with a leather satchel that looks like it's survived everything short of the apocalypse, water-stained, bullet-scarred, and held together with determination and prayer. As she opens it, Jake sees papers inside, official-looking documents with letterheads and seals that speak of government contracts and territorial expansion. Thomas found out that the Santa Fe Railway was planning to run a spur line right through this valley, Sarah explains, spreading the papers on a makeshift table formed by an old barrel and a piece of weathered wood. Not the route they announced publicly, but the real route, the one that would make certain parcels of land worth 10 times what they're selling for now. Jake studies the documents with growing unease because this isn't just about railroad speculation, this is about systematic fraud on a massive scale. Someone with access to territorial planning documents has been buying up land along the true railroad route while publicly promoting a false route to keep prices low. The scheme would net millions when the real route was announced, but it required keeping certain property owners from selling to anyone else until the manipulation was complete. Thomas was a surveyor before he became a farmer, Sarah continues, and Jake can hear the pride in her voice despite everything that's happened. He recognized what these documents meant, knew that families all through this valley were being cheated out of fortunes by people who had inside information. So he wrote to you, Jake says, the pieces falling into place with sickening clarity. Thomas wrote to Captain Jake Morrison, former Union cavalry officer turned territorial investigator, asking for help exposing the fraud. Sarah nods, but there's something else in her expression, something that makes Jake's stomach clench with anticipation of worse news to come. But the letter never reached you, did it? She asks quietly. Instead, it reached someone who knew that silencing Thomas Kellerman permanently was worth more than any amount of honest money could ever buy. The trap had been set with precision, but Jake was about to discover that even the trap had a trap, and the stakes were higher than either of them could have imagined. Jake feels the familiar tingle between his shoulder blades that meant someone was watching them, and his hand moves instinctively toward his weapon. Sarah, we need to get you out of here. If Marcus knows you're alive, he'll be back to finish what he started. But Sarah doesn't move, and there's something in her stillness that sends alarm bells ringing through Jake's experienced senses. She's not looking at him anymore. She's looking past him, toward the barn where shadows are moving in ways that shadows don't move on their own. I'm afraid it's too late for that, says a voice from behind them, and Jake turns to see his own face smiling at him with malice that makes his blood run cold. Marcus Morrison steps into the light wearing Jake's clothes, Jake's boots, even Jake's hat tilted at the same angle Jake wore it himself. The resemblance is so perfect it's like looking into a mirror, except mirrors don't usually hold smoking guns or smile with the kind of cruel satisfaction that comes from planning someone's death for months. Hello, brother, Marcus says, and his voice is identical to Jake's in every way except for the poison that drips from every word. I was wondering when you'd finally show up to collect your blood money. Took you longer than I expected. You always were slow on the uptake. Behind Marcus, Jake counts at least 3 other men emerging from various hiding places around the homestead, all armed, all positioned to prevent any chance of escape. You see, Jake, Marcus continues, clearly enjoying the moment, I needed someone to take the blame for all this railroad business, and who better than my own dear brother? Your reputation for justice and righteousness will make the perfect cover story when the territorial authorities find your body here alongside Mrs. Kellerman's. A tragic case of a good man gone bad, killed while trying to cover up his crimes. Sarah's face has gone pale, but Jake notices her hand moving slowly toward the pocket of her apron, and he realizes that whatever's about to happen, she's been preparing for it. The woman who survived 3 days in a root cellar didn't survive by accident. and Jake suspects she's got more fight left in her than anyone realizes. But Marcus had made one crucial mistake in his planning, and it was about to cost him everything. Sarah's hand emerges from her apron pocket holding not a weapon, but a small brass object that catches the late afternoon light like a signal mirror. Jake recognizes it immediately, a cavalry whistle, the kind officers use to coordinate charges and retreats across the noise of battle. But before he can process what that means, Sarah puts the whistle to her lips and blows 3 sharp blasts that echo across the valley like the judgment of angels. Marcus's confident smile falters because that whistle call is a code, and everyone who's served in the cavalry knows what it means: enemy spotted, close ranks, prepare for battle. The response comes from the hills around the homestead, not the echoes of Sarah's whistle, but answering calls from at least a dozen different positions. Marcus's men look around nervously as the sound bounces off rocks and spreads through the valley, and Jake realizes that this abandoned homestead isn't as deserted as it appeared. "You see, Mr. Morrison," Sarah says, and now her voice carries steel instead of fear, "Thomas wasn't the only one who wrote letters. He also sent word to every ranch within 30 miles about what he'd discovered, and asked them to be ready in case trouble came calling." The answering whistles grow closer, and Jake can see dust clouds rising from multiple directions as riders converge on their position. Marcus's face twists with rage as he realizes his perfect plan is collapsing around him like a house built on sand. "You think a bunch of dirt farmers can stop us?" he snarls, raising his gun toward Sarah. But Jake is already moving, 20 years of survival instincts taking over as he throws himself between his brother's weapon and the woman who's proven herself braver than any soldier he's ever served beside. The shot rings out across the valley, followed immediately by the thunder of approaching hoofbeats and the war cries of men who've decided that enough is enough. But the shot that would determine everyone's fate was still hanging in the balance. Jake feels the bullet crease his ribs like a hot iron, but his own shot flies true, catching Marcus in the shoulder and spinning him around like a child's top. They hit the ground together, brothers locked in combat 20 years in the making, rolling through dust and gravel while gunfire erupts around them from Marcus's men and the arriving ranchers. Blood from Jake's wound mixes with blood from Marcus's, making the ground slippery and treacherous beneath their boots as they struggle for control of Marcus's fallen weapon. "You always were Father's favorite," Marcus gasps, and even now, dying and desperate, there's more pain than anger in his voice. "I never wanted to be," Jake replies, pinning his brother's gun arm to the ground while Marcus's free hand claws at his throat. Around them, the battle rages with the fury of men fighting for their homes and families against those who would steal everything they've worked for. Sarah has taken cover behind an overturned wagon and is calmly reloading a rifle with the efficiency of someone who learned to shoot before she learned to read, picking off Marcus's men with precision that would make a military instructor proud. The tide of battle is turning, but Jake can see in Marcus's eyes that his brother has one final gambit left to play. Marcus's hand finds the hidden derringer in his boot, the same one their father carried during his own days in the territory, and Jake realizes that all those years of resentment and jealousy have led to this moment, brother facing brother with their father's gun between them. "If I can't have the money," Marcus whispers, "then at least I can have the satisfaction of knowing you died knowing the truth." His finger tightens on the trigger, and Jake sees his own death reflected in eyes that mirror his own. Time slows to the pace of a funeral march, and Jake Morrison understands that some choices define not just the moment they're made, but every moment that comes after. But Sarah Kellerman had one more surprise left, and it would change the meaning of everything they thought they understood about family and forgiveness. The derringer clicks empty, and Marcus's face twists with disbelief and rage as he realizes that Sarah must have found and unloaded it during the 3 days she spent hiding in the root cellar, planning for this exact moment. "You always underestimated everyone who wasn't you," Jake says quietly, holding his brother down while the sounds of battle fade around them. Marcus's men are either dead, captured, or fleeing into the desert, leaving only the 2 brothers and the truth that's been burning between them for 20 years. "Father never had a favorite, Marcus. He just had hopes, and you kept disappointing him." Marcus's face crumbles, and suddenly he's not the dangerous outlaw who's been terrorizing the territory, he's just Jake's little brother, 11 minutes younger and still trying to prove he deserves love. I wanted to make him proud, Marcus whispers, blood frothing at the corners of his mouth as his shoulder wound takes its toll. But everything I touched turned to poison, and everything you touched turned to gold. How was I supposed to compete with Saint Jake, the war hero, the man everyone could count on? The words carry 20 years of pain, and Jake realizes that while he was building a reputation for honor and justice, his brother was building a fortress of resentment and self-hatred. You could have asked for help, Jake says, applying pressure to Marcus's wound despite everything his brother has done. Family doesn't compete, Marcus. Family survives together. But Marcus shakes his head weakly, and Jake can see the light starting to fade from eyes that mirror his own. Too late for that now, Marcus whispers. But Jake, the railroad documents, they're not the only ones. There's a whole network, territorial officials, federal marshals, even army officers. I was just a small piece of something much bigger. His hand grips Jake's shirt with desperate strength. Don't let them win. With those words, Marcus Morrison breathes his last, leaving Jake alone with the weight of brotherhood and the burden of justice that extends far beyond this dusty homestead in the middle of nowhere. Jake Morrison buries his brother on the hill overlooking the Kellerman homestead, marking the grave with a simple wooden cross that bears no name, just the dates of a life that chose the wrong path but found redemption in its final moments. Sarah stands beside him as they watch the sun set over a valley that's safe again, at least for now, holding the railroad documents that will expose the corruption Marcus died trying to reveal. The ranchers who answered her whistle call have gone home to their families, carrying stories of a woman's courage and a stranger's honor that will echo